keynote. We have the pleasure of Andy Slavitt joining us today in conversation with Dean Megan Ranney. And it's going to be a wide-ranging conversation I'm very much looking forward to. So to kick us off, I'm just going to introduce our dean at the School of Public Health. Dr. Megan L. Ranney is an emergency physician, researcher, and leading advocate for innovative approaches to public health. She is dean of our Yale School of Public Health, the CEA Winslow Professor of Public Health, and a professor of emergency medicine here at Yale. She is the first dean to lead YSPH since it became fully independent in 2024, with a strategic vision linking science and society and making public health foundational to communities everywhere. Dr. Ranney's career has been driven by her front row seat to preventable public health crises, from her formative years in the Peace Corps to her 20-plus years as practicing as an emergency physician. Whether addressing motor vehicle industries and firearm violence, HIV, COVID-19, or important healthcare access challenges, her firsthand experiences have fueled her commitment to high-quality science and making sure that science is understood for communities around the globe. We're so happy to have you here, Dean Ranney. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, KP, and those of you in the room that know me know that I hate having my bio read, so I appreciate that. Thank you, KP. It's wonderful to see so many familiar faces in the room as well as a bunch of new ones. It is a total pleasure today to get to host this keynote conversation with my friend and colleague, Andy Slavitt. So for those who are not familiar, Andy was President Biden's White House senior advisor for COVID response, and prior to that, led many of the nation's most important health care initiatives. He served as President Obama's head of Medicare and Medicaid, and oversaw the turnaround, implementation, and defense of the Affordable Care Act, including, of course, leading healthcare.gov's rebooting. He is known as the Outsider's Insider, serving as founder and board chair emeritus of United States of Care, and as a founding partner of Town Hall Ventures, which we'll talk about today, a healthcare firm that invests in improving care in underrepresented communities. He's also the author of Preventable, a best-selling account of the U.S. coronavirus response, and led the In the Bubble podcast for many years, which is one of the ways that I got to know him. So, Andy, thank you for joining us here in New Haven.
Thank you, Dean Ranney.
It's a pleasure. So I'm going to start today. We're going to talk for about, 30-ish minutes, and then I'll leave somewhere around 10 to 15 minutes for questions from you all. I say that in advance so that you can be thinking about what it is that you want to ask of Andy. And I'll try to take us through a little bit around his career, around the current state of policy, talking a little bit about innovation and the future, and then we'll open it up to all of you. So let me start with the first topic of kind of how you got from there to here. Can you share a little bit about your journey from the private sector and McKinsey into national health leadership?
What a messy story. There I was, minding my own business. I was working in the private sector. I'd been an entrepreneur. I'd founded a company called Health Allies, which in 2003 I sold to United Health Group, every little boy's dream, and worked inside what eventually became the Optum organization, helped build that from start to about a $40 billion business. And so I was a kind of corporate healthcare person, for lack of a better description, until 2013 when the ACA launched, and with it launched, as Dean Ranney referred to, the healthcare.gov, which was the technology that was supposed to make it all work, didn't work. I don't know if anybody remembers that, but it was seared in your memory. I don't know what you did at that time, but most people did the smart thing and minded their own business and said, that's unfortunate. I picked up the phone and called Washington and said, hey, do you need help fixing it? And when you make a phone call like that, believe me, you assume that it's going to go unreturned or something like that. 3 days after I made the phone call, they announced that I was going to lead the turnaround of healthcare.gov. And to make matters worse, at the end of the press conference, they said, and it will be fixed within 5 weeks. I hadn't laid eyes on the thing. So that got me from a cold start, into this turnaround mode where hundreds of people focused on basically making this technology work and turning it around. And after that happened, the president asked if I was interested in serving out the rest of the term. It was now 2 years left in his second term. President Obama asked if I was interested in sticking around, and I went to run CMS for 2 years, which was an amazing experience. Nothing that I had anticipated, but so I got to government in a way that I don't recommend if you're going to go to government, and in a way that's different from most. But it was great. It was a great way to get in, I suppose.
We're all pretty grateful, so I do think it was a great way to get in. I also think there's a certain joy or attraction in coming in and having the challenge of fixing things, which you seem to leap into over and over again. So I asked you earlier, as you and I were talking about kind of whether you enjoyed and would recommend time in government service, and your answer was a full-throated yes. I'm curious if you could share with the room kind of what it is that you liked about being in public service, what was interesting, and maybe what some challenges were that those in the private sector may not fully appreciate.
Well, as soon as I took the job, I was pretty sure I'd made another horrible mistake. I was going to go in to do something that I had no idea what I was doing, going to be away from my family, and it wasn't until my first day when I walked into my office that I realized I'd made a good decision. And you know how I realized was, true story, behind the desk on a pole was the American flag. And I realized I had never had a job before where there was an American flag in my office. And it was there for a reason, to tell me what I was doing and why I was there. And I asked people, the reputation of running CMS, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, is, I would describe it as the best job in healthcare and the worst job in Washington. You run a $1.5 trillion budget. You make all the rules for the healthcare system. Nobody's satisfied with those rules. Everybody wants access to that money, and it's pretty demanding. The president is on top of you. The Congress is angry with you. Hospitals, health plans, everybody. And I remember going to talk to someone who I knew who was pretty wise in the ways of Washington. And he said, you're going to run into all of this, and everybody's going to be mad at you, and everybody's going to want things, and it will be no win. Every decision you make that will make one person happy will make the other party unhappy. But he said, but there's one secret to the job. And I said, oh, there's a secret to the job. That's good to know. What's the secret to the job? And he said, just do what you think is right. And I think so often we forget that. At the end of the day, for me, it was about what's right for beneficiaries, what's going to make beneficiaries' lives easier and better, and what's going to make the system better for taxpayers. And if I was asked to do something that I didn't think helped beneficiaries, then I wasn't going to do it. There's always a crisis going on in Washington, and my team would always come into my office and say, Andy, there's a crisis. There's a crisis. This is a crisis. And after a while, I sat my team down. I said, I think there's two types of crisis. There's real crises and there's fake crises. A real crisis is we can't get water, food, or medicine to the people of Puerto Rico, or we have a lead pipe crisis in Michigan. That's a real crisis. You can come into my office panicked, freaked out anytime you want if something like that happens. A fake crisis is Senator Schumer's mad at you.
Some things never change.
Right, exactly. Because Senator Schumer's always going to be mad. And I'm not saying we shouldn't deal with it professionally, But I really want us to save our energy for the things that really matter and the things that we really care about. And, I think the reason it's such a remarkable job is, you make decisions that can really impact lots of people in lots of ways. Went out to Washington State with the governor of Washington one time, and we went to visit several Indian reservations, and they had a ceremony for us. And we looked at each other like, why are they having this ceremony for us? Well, it turns out their ceremony was a ceremony they had for promises kept. And one of the promises kept was that apparently when we were expanding Medicaid, I had been given the choice between, it was told that if I can't really expand Medicaid for Alaska unless you pay for transportation for people to get to medical events, because otherwise people are too far away. So I said, okay, well, why don't we pay for transportation? And they said, well, if you do that, then you've got to pay for transportation off of every Indian reservation in the country when they can't get adequate medical care. So I said, okay, sounds like a plan. Let's do that. And literally it was one of those decisions that comes across your desk that you make in the course of a day without really thinking about it beyond the decision. And yet that decision, we were told when we were out at this site, had literally changed the lives of all of the reservations in the Northwest area who had struggled to get access to care. And so where else do you get to do that? I mean, like, I don't care whatever your best day is or your worst day is. If you get to impact people like that directly with decisions you get to make, it's really, really powerful. And it's why I think people who do decide to do government service get addicted to it. They don't get addicted because they get treated great. They don't get addicted because they get paid well. They don't get addicted to it for a lot of the reasons that you might get addicted to a job. They get addicted to it because if you love what you do, you can make an incredible impact.
That is an outstanding story, and those who know me and spend time with our School of Public Health know that I frequently talk about how trust is built through action, through showing up and keeping your promises. So the idea of having a promise ceremony, one that shows that promises have been kept, is just gorgeous.
I know the sad thing?
What?
We asked the person who led the prayer how often the Indian community has said the promises kept prayer. And he told us that in the history of the country, this was the 5th time they had recited the prayer.
I'll take a moment for that one and hope that this audience can help us recite that prayer a few more times. So I'm curious, as you tell that story, what sort of principles or information sources did you use? And I ask this, I'm thinking about this audience. These are people who are entrepreneurs, scholars, doers. How did you think about what sort of information you needed to gather and what principles you used to make those difficult decisions? And for those who don't know, Andy not just ran CMS, but then came back and ran COVID response under President Biden. You've faced a lot of situations where you've had really quick decisions to make with incomplete information. So how did you think about balancing that desire for data with kind of integrity or guiding rubrics?
Well, look, I think you're always going to make decisions with very incomplete information. And getting comfortable with that is its own journey. But oftentimes you've got a day or less than a day to make a decision, and so you can gather all the information that you possibly can, talk to all the smart people who might have a view that you can possibly find. And when you put all of that together, you've got to end up making a judgment. I do find it helpful to know what you're solving for. And it's easiest to me if you're solving for one thing. And in the case of the COVID response, where principally what we were trying to do was figure out how to get enough vaccines out, manufactured, produced, distributed, and to put into people's arms, the first principle for me was save the next life. So what's the decision that's going to save the next life? Where should that vaccine go where someone is most likely to die if they don't get it, was a real organizing principle for me. And so, and not just for me, for all of us. And so, getting vaccines into communities where there were a lot of essential workers, and a lot of seniors, and a lot of at the time, people of color, rural communities, was essential, because the first vaccines were all getting gobbled up by people who had been naturally scared and waiting a long time, but had more resources and weren't quite as at risk because many of them were working from home. So, that was a key example, I think, of an organizing principle that helped us figure out how to make decisions very rapidly. Should I send these vaccines here or there? Should we make more? Should we use the War Powers Act to make more vaccines or not? Well, if it met this principle, we were going to try to do it.
Thank you. And I know you've stayed involved with policy. So a month or so ago, I had Chris Klump come and visit us here, current senior advisor to the current Secretary of Health. I know you and he are close, and you were part of his decision to go into the administration. I'm curious about your thoughts about decisions or kind of key policy dynamics that are shaping the healthcare and innovation landscape right now. And if you feel like commenting on kind of some of those ways that one could influence principles or data that they're using, I would welcome those thoughts.
Well, I'm most familiar with what's going on in CMS right now, more so than CDC or FDA or NIH, which each have their own set of separate issues. But so I didn't know Dr. Oz. Do you know Oz?
I don't know him personally. Okay. I know Chris, but not Mehmet.
So I hadn't met Oz, who's the guy sitting in the job that I had, when he got named. But he called me a day or so after he got named, and we stayed on the phone for like 2 hours. And I found him incredibly humble and very charming, and but he really wanted to know, well, like, what does it take to do this job well? And I thought he asked all the right questions. He's built a great team, including Chris Klump, for those who haven't met him, is also the head of Medicare. In addition to, he both works for Oz and is Oz's boss somehow.
Also sounds about right. Yes, right now.
Yeah. But he built a great team. He picked a set of priorities. He's been very, very focused on, and so I've been pretty pleased with how at least the CMS team has been doing things, and I think I've had this perspective that you can disagree with people across the political spectrum. You can disagree with people for a lot of reasons. But if you can manage to figure out how to disagree with them in ways that are civil and recognize that people you disagree with still may have positive motivations, they still may want to solve problems. They may want to do it in a completely different way, and they may have a different set of principles. They may even make decisions you disagree with. But if you at least give them credit for showing up and wanting to do the job for the right reason, until they prove otherwise, then we can disagree again in a healthy way. And I think that's kind of what's been missing in this country for some time, is the rhetoric and the ill intent, and we can all figure out where to point fingers, and we can all get angry, and there's moments when you really do need to advocate hard for your side. But there's plenty of moments when you can, I think, build bridges with people in policy, listen to them, have them listen to you, give them the benefit of the doubt. And when you disagree civilly. And you find that you can actually build really quite strong relationships that way. You also, I think in healthcare, there's more we agree on than we disagree on. I really believe that. I mean, if you've ever had a loved one in a hospital with undergoing surgery, believe me, all of your principles and beliefs and other things like that get parked to the side, and you're focused on, I want the best care, I want this to work out right. And for most Americans, there's a lot of things that are true. If someone in their family gets sick, they want to be able to afford to take care of them so they can get healthy. And until they can do that, they're going to feel incredibly insecure. And so whether you approach the system from a standpoint of we got to make it more efficient, it costs less, whether we got to improve, you approach it from the standpoint that we've got to improve access, whether you approach it from the standpoint that we've got to improve quality, all those things are consistent. And so the key is, I think, is always to try to find the common thread where you can unify the conversation and start from the same place.
Are there things coming out of CMS right now that you're particularly excited about or see as real opportunities for us to lean into?
Yeah, I mean, I would look at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Innovation, for those of you who know it, or don't, if you don't know it. It's CMMI. It's run by a guy named Abe Sutton, who's really terrific, very high quality, very committed person. He's creating models, new innovation models, which I think are incredibly thoughtful, takes very transparent, takes high quality input, and it's been really quite promising. Despite the fact that there are things that going on as is happening in Medicaid, which are challenging, there are people there actually trying to solve these problems.
I'm going to actually go from that to Town Hall Ventures because I think they're deeply kind of interrelated questions. But can you just give folks here an overview of what Town Hall Ventures is, and then I'll kind of ask some questions about the policy implications.
Town Hall Ventures. So in many ways, it's a traditional venture capital firm that I started with a partner in 2018. The idea behind the firm was we would invest in opportunities that drove innovation into underserved communities. And we defined those by people who were effectively, look, we're on the cusp of Oura Ring going public. And that's fantastic for those of us who want to optimize our sleep. But that's not the only kind of innovation there is. And, it is one kind of innovation. But we believed that the kind of innovation we needed was the kind of innovation that was going to transform the way communities, for example, receive mental health care, or the way frail elderly are taken care of, or the way care is delivered in urban environments or in rural environments where there's not a lot of access to primary care. There's no access to chronic disease management. There's a lot of affordability issues. So we felt like this was ripe and fertile ground for innovation, and not just because it was a good thing to do, but because we thought it was a way to build really great companies. We thought amazing businesses could be built doing this very thing because these were very big markets and very big opportunities. And so we raised our first fund in 2018. It was a relatively small fund. It was a $115 million fund. We invested in 15 companies. And the legend of it is that 8 of those companies became billion-dollar businesses.
That's a pretty good batting average.
Yes, so we could keep that up.
Yeah.
We worked with amazing founders and amazing entrepreneurs. Some of you may know City Block Health. We wrote the first check into City Block Health. Other companies which we're incredibly proud of, and people are doing incredible things. So here we are in 2026. We've raised 4 funds. We've got $1.5 billion under management, 45 companies. There's about 16 of us. We both invest in early stage investment opportunities. We also build companies from scratch ourselves. 1 out of every 5 companies is a company we build from scratch. We work with the entire ecosystem because, as I think we'll talk about, one of the places we try to add value is it's not a matter of getting a company off the ground, but getting a company to scale. And that's kind of where we try to pride ourselves in our ability to kind of get to escape velocity from the sort of early stage, so that you're not just a small company doing a good thing, but are substantially serving and changing healthcare.
Let me follow that thread, and then I will come back to the policy landscape. One of our faculty, Chim Ndumale, asked us as we were standing kind of before we came up about kind of that balance between ideas and process. Like, what is it that makes a company scale? What is the thing that turns something into a unicorn? You've now watched, I mean, you say you have 46 companies currently under that y'all are investing in. Like, how do you see that balance between, oh my gosh, this is an awesome idea, no one else has thought of it, versus, oh, this team has figured out what the things are that you need to do to make this work in Idaho as well as in Alabama or Bridgeport?
You know, one of the great interesting things I learned at CMS was that if you identify any clinical or other medical challenge, I'm pretty sure that someone somewhere across the country has figured out how to solve it. So, you know, kids with dyslexia that have mental health challenges, I promise you, I don't know where, I don't know who, but I promise you somewhere in this country, there's someone who has built an incredible model figuring out how to take care of kids with dyslexia and their mental health issues. And they're probably doing it on a $200,000 grant. They've probably done it with 30 kids, but it probably works really, really well. It's just never scaled. And in some ways, you could, okay, that's promising, and it is promising. But healthcare is littered with subscale innovation, littered with subscale innovations. There are, put aside the nonprofits, just look at for-profits, there are hundreds and hundreds and thousands of small healthcare companies that are essentially, you know, $1 million in revenue, maybe serving one market or maybe two, and just can't seem to get to that next level of escape velocity. And to us, that's the exciting part of what we hope to bring, which is the capital, the technology, the talent, and the access to the ecosystem. You know, we would like to kick open the front door to, you know, name the health plan or the hospital or somewhere that someone needs to make the sale. You know, part of our job is to get the companies ready to make that sale and then to go to make that happen. With AI, think it should be much easier to scale. It should be much easier to build, and it is. So, you know, there should be more opportunities for it to scale, but still it's a noisy environment. It's a noisy atmosphere. And so if you went to the person at the hospital or the health plan that has to buy the technology or buy the product, it's very confusing because there's a million things flying at them. And so you got to help them sort through that. And we have a full-time team that's just dedicated to helping hospitals and health systems sort through that. And the hospitals and health systems actually have invested in our fund in order for us to help them do that. And that gives us access to them. One statistic we like to quote is in 2025, our companies did over $5 billion of commerce with our hospital and health system, health plan investors. That's the growth and the scale that I think you need to see in order for these things to break through. So you're not just changing one community, but you're changing the national model.
I love that. And I think one of the places that you and I align is this idea that the next kind of generation of innovators are not just around discrete technologies or discrete pharmaceutical products, but rather are about services. This may be too much of like your secret sauce at Town Hall Ventures, but I'm curious about how when you see an idea, when you see one of those companies that has serving, you know, 1 million lives or 500,000 lives, how you assess whether or not you think it is something that has the potential to scale with the right resources and network. Does that make sense as a question?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it does come down to the team. And whether the team has the capabilities and ambition to really change the way things work. We invested in a company called Time Care, THYME, that is changed the way, basically told us, we're going to change the way cancer care works. And they have. They're one of the most transformative companies in working with patients with cancer and in practices with patients with cancer in a value-based transformational model. And I could see different entrepreneurs taking the same idea and not getting nearly as far as they have. I think there's a great deal of kind of both combination of execution and ambition that we look for in the companies that we invest in. And just to be clear about it, if you talk to a venture capitalist and they make the mistake that I've made, which is to say, if they say we did this, we did not. There is no we involved. It's the companies. We as venture capitalists don't do a damn thing. We get very lucky to be on the ride with these companies and these great founders. But if you had Toyin Ajayi from Cityblock up here, who I know you've spoken with before, you would see that the magic and the power is in what she and her team do. And if at best, an investor gets to help, but oftentimes an investor does the opposite, trying to help.
Yeah, also true. Well, and that's where you also get to choose who some good investors are that you work with. So are there things that you see kind of coming down the horizon, and partly reflecting on this current administration and what you know about what's going on within CMS right now, but also looking, as you said, to AI? Are there things that you see as kind of ripe for innovation or investment? Are there topics or tools that you are particularly excited about that you wish someone was working in or with?
Look, I think AI is changing, and has the power to change the productivity equation in healthcare in a really transformative way. We are seeing opportunities. First of all, AI is the first technology to come to healthcare that healthcare actually wants. Healthcare didn't want the EMR. Healthcare didn't particularly beg for cloud. Healthcare didn't beg for mobility. None of those things made healthcare more productive. None of them made doctors more productive. None of them made patients healthier. AI is different. You couldn't take rip AI away from people because it's solving real problems for them, both clinicians and patients. What it has the power to do, it has the power to help really great quality medicine get to people regardless of their circumstances. I've seen applications of AI in street medicine where you've taken an entire knowledge base of how to treat people and how to treat conditions and how to identify and diagnose and put it in the hands of community health workers out on the street. And it's incredibly powerful. So if you're building a company today, if you're building a clinical model today to serve patients, you build it completely differently if you're going to build it AI native. And I think that's where there is enormous potential. As an investor, we still look at it the same way. Are you delivering better care to communities and getting better outcomes more efficiently? So the AI itself is not the thing. The AI itself is just what makes the thing happen. And it's this underlying layer that becomes so essential to all the things that we do. But it really, I've become a big believer in a very relatively short amount of time what a big difference it's going to make.
And how are you thinking about kind of the human in the loop portion with AI? It's something that we have a lot of debates about on campus, right? The relative strengths and weaknesses of some of the new AI programs. As a physician, right, what happens when my patient goes and looks for an answer on AI instead of talking to me, or create that kind of parasocial relationship with their chatbot and doesn't bring it back? How are you, or do you think that's just a silly worry that is going to get obviated as we begin to integrate AI more systematically into the systems that we have?
Weirdly, I think AI behaves more human towards people than physicians often do, more empathetic.
Yeah, well, yes.
More tolerant of people asking questions over and over, more tolerant of people not getting it the first time. So I think we humans can learn a lot from how AI is being trained, because I think it's being trained in ways that are very. I'm being a little bit provocative, of course, because we don't want this technology let loose in the wild without human guidance. But I think to some degree, we will be putting humans in the loop just for the sake of doing that. We just got the first pilot. Did people see the first pilot out of Utah for the?
Are you all familiar with what he's talking about with using AI for prescriptions? Yeah.
So you can in Utah they ran a pilot for a couple hundred drugs, where AI can automatically renew, without they're actually using human to review, but the place it's going is where human physicians won't need to review the prescriptions, and not surprisingly, the results will look pretty good. Not perfect; they'll get better, but they look pretty good. So I think this has the potential to really transform medicine, and medicine has the potential to really slow it down in ways that I think will be destructive.
Well, and they are right. There's been a lot of pushback against that, partly because of kind of the guild mentality of some of our healthcare groups, whether it is medical or pharmacist or others. I'm curious, as a last question before I open it up to the group for their questions to you. You and I have talked a lot about this intersection between public health and healthcare as being a space of potential innovation. Right here in the United States, we think of them as very often separate systems that barely talk to each other. I'm curious about your thoughts around innovation in that space, around kind of how we think on a population as well as on an individual basis. As we're watching the destruction of many of the systems that we relied on, that also creates opportunities for people who have big ideas. Are there things that you're seeing that are exciting or interesting, or where you wish that folks would lean in?
I mean, do you consider population health to be public health or healthcare?
I think the way that population health is conceptualized right now, it is more health care than public health, because it's about like VBC. It's how do I reduce costs for this population that is within my covered lives for right now. It's not thinking on a broader kind of community scale. Yeah. And it counts on the fact that the public health systems are going to continue to make sure that water is clean and air is clean and food establishments are safe. So I think there's also a reliance on the existing public health system, which we may be taking too much for granted right now in this country.
Well, for sure we do, yeah. Look, it's a great question. We have undervalued the clear leaps that public health has given us as a society, and then took it for granted. And then I think COVID probably set us back. Mm-hmm. I'm sure you'd agree, with at least some large portion of the public, even further. But I think the question that we have yet to answer, if we don't value public health enough, is who takes care of the things that it's in nobody's financial interest to take care of, and how do we do that, and how do we look after those things, and how do we care about those things? And other countries have answered that question, as you pointed out, very differently. They've integrated the thinking together, but we have diseases that build over long periods of time. We have diseases that are sourced from the environment. We have diseases that come from the food we eat and all that. And I will say, that I find that Secretary Kennedy, in an odd way, is talking about public health.
I agree. Just sometimes not with the right answers to the questions that he's asking. Although sometimes he does. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So look, I think it's a question we're not going to have end up with a good answer for, or at least I'm not going to end up with a good answer for. Here, but I guess I'd say it's sneaking up from the oddest places, and we should take advantage while we can, where we can, and if people want to have a dialogue about pesticides and healthy foods and organic foods and the food pyramid and so forth, let's engage.
Thank you. And we know that innovation comes from the meeting of unlikely bedfellows often, so I appreciate your indulging with my provocative question. I will now open it up to the group for folks to ask their questions. I see someone standing in enthusiasm in the back. You don't all have to stand in order for me to call on you.
Yeah. I'm so excited to talk to you guys. Thank you for a wonderful conversation. Appreciate you both being here. I'm Leon Rosenblatt, Beth Israel Deaconess, Harvard Medical School. I work primarily in AI governance in healthcare and life sciences nowadays. So I think a lot about who gets to implement rules that ensure safety, trust, efficacy, equity. And Andy, given your very interesting range among serving at the highest level of federal government and working in the innovation ecosystem, I'm wondering how you think about that. Given our current environment, which of the stakeholders are in the best position to create sets of rules that ensure that we maintain high levels of safety and trust as we roll out essential, very attractive, and very lucrative technologies?
Boy, I don't know. I don't know. Do we know? Is there an answer to that question at this point, other than we need to work hard to build a consensus with a lot of incredibly smart people with broad perspectives? I mean, look, I think I look at something like open evidence. That people are familiar with open evidence, and they won the trust battle early.
Yeah.
Right, in your parlance, and there seems to be now a route for free, high quality information to get to clinicians. The clinicians are going to use if they have an NPI, whether or not a governance system is set up to protect it or not. I do think that at the end of the day, what you do is essential because the people inside Israel Beth Deaconess or anywhere else, they're going to want to use this technology, and they're going to want to use whichever technology is handy for them. It could be ChatGPT, it could be Claude, it could be open evidence, it could be a lot of things. And so having someone effectively say to them, this is the way to do it, this is what to use, this is what gets the job done for X and for Y, I think will be really important for there not to be chaos and for there to be some sort of systematic set of bad answers. I suspect that's going to evolve. It's a great question.
Thank you. And I'll suggest maybe for those in the room that there may be like a local aspect to try stuff out at first, and then it can extend federally. We're going to go over here and then back to the middle. Shouting is fine, but I think we're coming with a mic, but yeah.
Hi, great to meet you. Great conversation. Danny Mendoza. I just started a fund to invest in pre-seed, early stage, but my background is healthcare on the payer side for over a decade, leading innovation. So I saw so much opportunity for ideas to accelerate, to be adopted, to be introduced. What's the value that you bring as an investor? Because I think you were underplaying it, but understanding the space, opening doors is huge because you're giving these ideas a little bit of oxygen. How can we do more of that? What have you found to be successful, and what's repeatable?
Boy, so the joyous part of your job is going to be meeting these founders with these ideas who are, to some degree, going a million miles an hour and are some degree stuck in the mud. And, if you could do anything to unsick them and get them on their way, it's amazing how fast they'll be able to go. So just identifying those points in the journey where people need someone to pick up the phone and call. They may need to call you every night for 5 nights for 2 hours just to hash through something till they get it solved. Or they may need you to open some door for them, or they may need you to make some introduction, or tell them, help them recruit someone amazing to their team. But that's it's those little things. A great founder may have the vision, but they're still going to get stuck on a bunch of things. And if you can, as an early stage investor, help them along, you're doing an incredible amount of good for them.
Thank you. I think in the middle, and then I'll try to get some. If I've not seen hands raised on this side, so we'll go Shelby. I know some people's names, not all.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting to hear your perspective. This is, I think, somewhat related to your question, the previous question. So in a session yesterday with the Yale New Haven Health AI innovation effort, they discussed what types of things that they've learned in the process of developing these technologies in the health system. And one thing that they mentioned is that there's a limiting factor of this consolidation. So there's a lot of these different tools. Like you mentioned, there's a lot of $1 million companies doing some type of technology. And they said that it's more beneficial or advantageous to be a technology company that offers multiple services. And I was wondering if you could speak on that a little bit more about like whether you've experienced that in your ventures.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think what happens at the beginning of these markets is people adopt these point solutions because they solve an acute problem. And then, the gentleman who asked the first question up there, waving, will turn around and find that the organization's deployed like 30 different point solutions all over the place with that don't connect, and each pulls data from a different place in a different way. And at some point, someone calls timeout and says, we need a more comprehensive, thoughtful way of deploying technology. And it's one of the reasons why companies don't scale very well, is because they go in and think that the piece of bread they're slicing is the most important thing in the world. And in fact, it's got to be part of a larger ecosystem. So, yes, companies that are doing, I think, will do very well are ones that think it through from the customer's perspective first. Think about what's the problem that this solves, and how does it land, and how does it solve the problem, rather than simply, how do I deal with this one discrete event.
Do we have questions from this side of the room? Yes. All right, I saw a man kind of a couple rows back, his hand up first. And then we'll see. This will probably be the last question. Apologies to those who I didn't get to. But I do try to be equal opportunity, depending on where you sit. Go ahead.
Thank you very much for the conversation. I'm Orlando Yarborough. You spoke about leading the COVID response for the nation. During that time, there was different information around believing COVID, trusting the vaccine, health professionals, our healthcare system and infrastructure. How did you navigate that as a leader, and are there any lessons that you have taken from that?
It's interesting. The best you can hope for is to get the best information in front of people to make the best possible decisions. We had when we started out with the COVID response, there was a survey which said that about 50% of Americans were desperate for the vaccine. About 30% said they wanted to wait and see, but if they liked the information they saw, they would get the vaccine. And then another 10 to 20% said, over my dead body, am I taking this vaccine? And sometimes literally, sadly, but we got 80% of people vaccinated eventually. And we really had to work hard in the communities that weren't getting access to the information that they needed. But again, here, I think there's a really important point to make, which is you never get there by assuming that the people who were deciding not to get vaccinated had some sort of ill intent or ignorance. There's a history of people with vaccines in this country that has not gone well. There is people who are getting information from the wrong sources would have reason to believe that there were challenges. An interesting fact, I don't know the exact percentage, but I've seen two different studies which has shown that somewhere between 10 and 20% of people are needle phobes. My wife and one of my kids are desperately fearful of needles. I mean, my wife, who's very brave and very strong, hates needles related to something that happened in her childhood. And so I have a perspective that a lot of people who were not excited about getting the vaccine could have been very simply needle phobes. And so getting people past and really understanding that fact, it's not necessarily mean that they're going to change their minds, but understanding that that's really at root for some people turns out to be important. So, listening hard to what's really going on and trying to get people with, the most accurate facts possible. And, as Dr. Ranney's a pioneer in establishing trust, which has to be done locally, has to be done with people that people already trust, was really essential.
Well, that is a gorgeous way to end this conversation. I think that is a goal for all of us in whatever work we're doing, is to think about how we establish trust in addition to establishing great businesses that do great things. May we all go off and result in more promise-keeping ceremonies out there. Please join me in thanking Andy for keeping his promises. Go enjoy the day.